On a night when the wind howled like a wounded animal, the town of Ravenscroft lay under a heavy blanket of fog. No one dared to venture out after dark. Not since the whispers began, whispers of a ghostly figure seen drifting through the streets, silent as the grave. They called it the Phantom, a shadowy presence that left a trail of icy dread in its wake. Those who glimpsed it were never the same, haunted by eyes that seemed to burn with a cold, unearthly light. But tonight, the Phantom was not just a whisper. It was real, and it was near. Ravenscroft was an old town, steeped in history and secrets that most preferred to forget. The cobblestone streets wound through rows of ancient houses, their windows like empty eyes staring out into the foggy nights. Among the townsfolk, there was a quiet understanding some places were best left undisturbed, and some stories were better left untold. At the edge of town, where the trees grew thick and twisted, stood the abandoned Blackwood Manor. It had been empty for decades, ever since the tragic night when the last of the Blackwood family vanished without a trace. Some said it was cursed, others believed it was simply haunted by memories too painful to bear. But there were those who knew the truth. The house was haunted by something far worse. Sarah, a curious and brave 14-year-old, had heard the stories all her life. But unlike the other children who shuddered at the mention of Blackwood Manor, Sarah was fascinated. She wanted to know the truth about the Phantom, the ghost who walked among the living. And when she found an old, dusty journal in her grandmother's attic, filled with scribbled notes about the manor, she knew she had to uncover its secrets, no matter the cost. Sarah couldn't stop thinking about the journal she had found. Its pages were filled with frantic, almost illegible notes, sketches of symbols, and warnings written, in bold letters, "Stay away. Do not enter." But Sarah's curiosity only grew stronger. The journal had belonged to her great-grandfather, a man who had mysteriously disappeared after he became obsessed with the legends of Blackwood Manor. One cold afternoon, with the sun hanging low in the sky, Sarah decided to visit the manor. She told herself it was just to look around, to see the place for herself. But deep down, she knew she was searching for something, answers, or perhaps a connection to her family's past. As she approached the manor, the air grew colder, and the trees seemed to close in around her. The house loomed before her, dark and foreboding, its windows black and lifeless. The front door, heavy and warped with age, creaked open as if inviting her inside. The air was thick with dust and the smell of decay. The silence was so deep it pressed on her ears. Sarah clutched the journal tighter, flipping through its pages once more. There, she found a name that sent a chill down her spine. The Phantom. According to the journal, the ghost that haunted the manor was not just any spirit, it was the vengeful soul of someone wronged, someone who had never found peace. The journal spoke of a tragic story, a man who had been betrayed and murdered, his body hidden within the walls of the manor. His spirit, filled with rage and sorrow, had been trapped there ever since, cursed to walk the earth until justice was done. But justice never came. Over the years, the Phantom had become more than just a ghost. It was a force of darkness, driven by an insatiable need for revenge. Sarah realized with growing dread that the ghost in the manor was not just a story. It was real, and it was watching her. The journal's final entry was a desperate plea. "If you find this, leave this place. The Phantom sees all, it knows your fears. It will not let you go." But it was too late. The door behind Sarah slammed shut with a deafening crash, and the temperature dropped suddenly. She was no longer alone. The Phantom had awakened, heart pounding. Sarah spun around, searching for a way out, but the heavy door refused to budge. The room seemed to darken as shadows crept along the walls, moving with a life of their own. The journal's warnings echoed in her mind. The Phantom sees all. It knows your fears. Sarah took a deep breath, forcing herself to stay calm. She needed to find a way to escape before the ghost closed in on her. With trembling hands, she pulled out a small flashlight from her pocket and flicked it on, its weak beam cutting through the thick darkness. She decided to explore the manor, hoping to find another exit or at least some clue that might help her survive. The house was a labyrinth of long, narrow corridors and dusty, forgotten rooms. Each step Sarah took echoed eerily, as if the house itself were alive, watching her every move. As she ventured deeper into the manor, strange things began to happen. The temperature dropped even further, and Sarah could see her breath in the dim light. She heard faint whispers, unintelligible and distant. Like the voices of the dead, the walls seemed to pulse, almost as if they were breathing. And she couldn't shake the feeling that something was following her. Just out of sight, in one room, she found old, crumbling portraits of the Blackwood family. Their eyes seemed to follow her as she moved, their faces twisted into expressions of sorrow and anger. Among the portraits was a man who looked eerily familiar, her great-grandfather. Underneath his portrait was a plaque with the words, "He sought the truth and paid the price." Sarah's blood ran cold. She was walking in his footsteps, and she feared she might share his fate. As she pressed on, Sarah discovered more disturbing clues. In the basement, hidden behind a rotting bookshelf, she found a hidden passageway leading to a small, secret room. The walls were covered in old, faded newspapers detailing the mysterious disappearance of the Blackwood family. There were also sketches of strange symbols and markings, similar to those in the journal. But the most chilling discovery was a large, heavy chest in the center of the room. Hesitating, Sarah slowly opened the chest. Inside, she found the remains of a man, his bones cracked and brittle with age. She knew instantly who it was, the man who had become the Phantom. The journal was right. He had been betrayed, murdered, and hidden away. His spirit left to wander the manor in torment. Suddenly, the room grew colder, and Sarah felt a presence behind her. She turned slowly, her flashlight flickering. There, standing in the doorway, was the Phantom. His form was indistinct, a dark silhouette with glowing, hollow eyes that seemed to pierce into her soul. He moved towards her, his steps silent, but his presence heavy with anger and despair. Sarah backed away, her mind racing. She remembered the journal's words. The Phantom will not rest until justice is done. She had to do something. But what? She knew she couldn't leave the manor until she found a way to release the ghost from its torment. But how could she help a spirit bent on vengeance? Thinking quickly, Sarah pulled out the journal and frantically searched for any clue that might. There, in the final pages, she found a drawing of the strange symbols she had seen earlier, along with a short note. These symbols hold the key. Unite them to free the spirit. In a desperate rush, Sarah began searching the room for the symbols. They were carved into the floor, the walls, and the ceiling. She placed the journal in the center of the room, aligning it with the symbols as best she could. Then she closed her eyes and whispered a quiet prayer, hoping it would be enough. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the air around her began to change. The oppressive cold lifted slightly, and the whispers grew louder, more coherent. Sarah opened her eyes to see the Phantom standing still, watching her. His eyes no longer burned with anger, but with a deep, sorrowful longing. The symbols began to glow faintly, and the room filled with a soft, ethereal light. Sarah could feel the weight of the ghost's presence lifting, as if a great burden had been released. The Phantom raised a hand, and for the first time spoke. His voice was a low, mournful whisper. "Thank you." As the light grew brighter, the Phantom slowly faded away, his form dissolving into the air. The oppressive darkness lifted, and the manor seemed to sigh with relief. Sarah knew the ghost was finally at peace, but even as she felt a sense of accomplishment, she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. The door behind her creaked open, and she heard the distant sound of footsteps echoing through the corridors once more. Was the Phantom truly gone, or had she simply awakened something far worse? Just as Sarah began to believe she had freed the Phantom and brought peace to the manor, a sudden chill swept through the room. The soft, ethereal light that had filled the space flickered and died, plunging her back into darkness. The footsteps she had heard earlier grew louder, closer, echoing ominously through the hallways. Fear gripped her once more. She spun around, her heart racing. The symbols that had glowed with hope now appeared distorted and twisted, as if corrupted by some darker force. The air grew heavy, oppressive, and the manor seemed to close in around her. Sarah realized with a sinking feeling that she had made a grave mistake. She had disturbed something far older and more malevolent than the Phantom. The temperature plummeted, and Sarah's breath formed clouds in the icy air. From the shadows, a figure began to emerge, taller, more menacing than the Phantom had ever been. This was no lost soul seeking peace. This was a creature born of darkness, feeding on fear and despair. Its eyes glowed red, filled with an ancient, malevolent hunger. Sarah's mind raced, but she knew there was no escape this time. The door that had opened behind her was now sealed shut, as if the manor itself was conspiring to trap her. The creature moved closer, its steps slow and deliberate, savoring her terror. Desperate, Sarah clutched the journal to her chest, flipping through its pages in a frantic search for anything that could help her. But the journal's pages were blank. The ink faded into nothingness. It was as if all the knowledge and protection it once offered had been stripped away. The creature loomed over her, its presence suffocating. Sarah could feel the darkness creeping into her mind, filling her with despair. She knew she had to act quickly, or she would be lost forever, just like her great-grandfather. In a last, desperate attempt, Sarah remembered the final words the phantom had spoken. "Thank you." She realized that the ghost's release had not been in vain. The act of helping the phantom find peace had left a small, lingering spark of light within the manor, a spark that might be her only chance. Focusing all her willpower, Sarah closed her eyes and whispered a silent prayer, not to the darkness, but to the light. She called upon the spirit of the phantom, hoping that the gratitude and peace she had brought would be enough to protect her. For a moment, nothing happened. The creature's cold breath brushed against her face, and she could feel the darkness closing in. But then, just as she was about to give up, a warm, gentle light began to glow from the journal in her hands. The symbols on its pages reappeared, burning brightly, and the oppressive weight in the air began to lift. The creature hissed in fury, recoiling from the light. It tried to advance, but the light from the journal grew stronger, pushing it back. The walls of the manor began to shake, and the creature let out a final, ear-piercing shriek before it dissolved into a cloud of black smoke. Vanishing into the shadows, the light filled the room, dispelling the darkness entirely. Sarah felt the oppressive weight lift from her chest, and she collapsed to the floor, trembling but alive. The journal's light faded, leaving her in peaceful silence. The door behind her slowly creaked open once more, revealing the path to freedom. Sarah knew she had survived, but the experience had changed her forever. As she stepped out of the manor and into the fresh air, she couldn't help but glance back one last time. The manor stood quiet and still, its windows dark and lifeless once more. But Sarah knew the truth. While the phantom had been freed, there were other, darker forces still at play, and as she walked away, she couldn't shake the feeling that the manor was watching her, waiting for the next unfortunate soul to stumble into its grasp. Sarah walked away from Blackwood Manor, the cool night air, stark contrast to the oppressive darkness she had just escaped. The manor, now silent and still, loomed behind her like a shadow from a bad dream. She had freed the phantom and survived the terror that lay within those walls, but the experience had left her shaken to her core. As she made her way back to Ravenscroft, Sarah couldn't help but reflect on the events that had unfolded. She had sought out the truth, driven by curiosity and a desire to connect with her family's past. But what she found was far more than she had ever imagined. She had faced down not just a ghost, but an ancient evil that had been festering in the darkness for centuries. Though she had triumphed, Sarah knew that Blackwood Manor would remain a place of fear and mystery, its secrets still lurking in the shadows. The townspeople would continue to whisper about the haunted house at the edge of town, but now Sarah knew the truth. As she reached the safety of her home, Sarah made a vow. Never again would she let curiosity lead her into such danger. But deep down, she also knew that the story of the phantom would live on, a warning to those who dared to seek out the unknown. And as she lay down to rest that night, she couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere in the darkness, the manor still watched and waited, its evil presence far from gone.